Well, we made a lot of progress today, as evidenced by the mess. What we did here was I went through factory service manual and found a wiring diagram of the EFI harness, and from that I was able to determine that this is the basically the start switch. And what I've got here is I'm running it to the power supply, 12 volts, and I've just jumped it so that it's permanently in the on position. Okay, I'm not going to use a fuel pump tab. I have a separate circuit for the fuel pump. I might or might not use a start. I'm going to use another starter. I have a remote starter. The only thing this would do would add the starting enrichment, which may or may not be needed for the car to actually start and run. I'll deal with that when I get there. I've installed the relay, the main relay. To operate it, all I do is just plug in these two cords. The big cord here goes into the EFI harness. The small cord here I'm just using for the positive. That feeds the start. In other words, if I had a starter switch, this would be hooked up to the battery, to the starter switch. This would be hooked up to the this gets plugged in directly to the battery. Anyway, I plug these two cords into the power terminal over there, turn the switch on, and it's just like turning the ignition into the on position on your car. Okay, not the start, but the on position. So that's all worked out, and I verified my voltages. I went back to the pin and made sure that I think it's pin 10 is where you're supposed to have power to the EFI circuit. I made sure that I had power. I got the dropping resistors in there, so I made sure that I had a positive voltage to each of the injectors. So the only thing left to do now is to plug in the computer and test fire it to see if I can get the injectors to click. Now, I'm not sure. I think there's a shortcut to make that happen. Is you simply take the pin 10 connector, which by the way is right here. That's the one that triggers it, and I can trigger that by hooking it up to the negative terminal of the coil, and spark. But I'm not sure about this. I think I either read this somewhere on the forums or something, that if you simply ground that terminal out, and I don't know if it's a multiple times, like you do it times 3, or just once, one click, one ground, one fire. I'm not sure. I can't remember. But I think grounding that essentially triggers the EFI system to work. I don't know that for a fact, so I'll probably end up just go ahead, and I know that this is all going to work. All the electrical, I've tested all the pins to make sure I have the right throttle position sensor is working right, the temperature sensor is working right. I didn't bother with the AFM because I've already used that AFM on another car. I know it works. I guess I could just for sake of making sure that connector is right, I could go in there and test those. I haven't really done that. Maybe I'll do that. So I'm pretty confident that the sensors, the main ones, are the throttle position sensor and a temperature sending unit. The temperature sensor, not the one for the gauge, but the one that actually tells the EFI what's going on, is working fine. There's this auxiliary. This is nothing. This has to do with as the aforementioned. I think it goes to the temperature gauge for the instrument cluster, the BC, the boost control deceleration, BCDD, and maybe even to the start switch. I can't remember exactly what all it hooks up to, but it's all irrelevant. I'm not using any of that. It's a standalone. It's a standalone harness. It's not part of the EFI harness. So where are we? We're getting close. There's no reason to hook up the ECU until I'm going to go ahead and make up a new harness just to deal with the distributor, which I've got on, installed, and wire loomed all up. This is that other side of the harness, which goes to wire temperature switch, which in this case has to do with turning on the advance. There's 2 pickups in here. I think it went to the temperature sending unit right here, and I think it also operated some kind of solenoid that had something to do with the with advancing this with vacuum or something like that. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it doesn't matter. I'm not going to use any of that. You can see I've temporarily hooked up the airflow meter. I've got a support stick here. I just used an old gas filler tube for the rubber parts. So anyway, I predict probably by next weekend, hopefully, I'll have everything ready to roll for testing the spark and the firing of the EFI. What I'm going to do is I'm not going to put any fuel into it. I've already tested the rail. I know the injectors work. So if I just hear them clicking when I'll spin my spare distributor by hand. I'm not going to use one hooked up here. I'll spin it. If I hear the injectors clicking, then I know that part's working. If that's working, then I can hook up this distributor, hook up the fuel, and give it a test fire. I'll put a pump on it. Of course, I still need to put a pump on it. I'll get a radiator. I got a friend of mine who's offered to let me use a radiator, just plug that in. I don't like the idea of running an engine dry with no coolant at all. I know you could probably run it for a few seconds, it wouldn't hurt anything. But part of the process, part of the reason I'm doing all this is to check for fuel, for head gasket leaks. I want to know if the head gas is leaking. So obviously I'll need a radiator, I'll need to get up to operating temperature, hence all this elaborate setup. I want to be able to run the thing and actually, throttle it up and test it and see what happens. So that's where we are. More to come later. Thanks for watching.